I've got a couple of questions myself, which I'd quite like to ask, one for Omer and one for Amelia. And then if anybody else wants to ask anything, please feel free. Omer, I mean, I would like to ask you, what are your expectations of the case that has been filed in the International Criminal Court? How long do you think it's going to take? Have you any indication of what the response might be in this really sort of groundbreaking proposition that's been put to them? And Amelia, I'd like to ask you if you could, have you noticed any shift in policy since Syriza lost the elections to the current government? I think it was in May 2019. What's changed, and what reflection would you give in terms of international European politics and the response towards migration? So Omer first, and then Amelia, please. I think you have to unmute yourself, Omer, actually.
Yeah, I have. So with respect to the case is still pending out of 900, what we call Article 15 procedures that were submitted in 2019. When the case was filed, more than 860 were already rejected, and we are in the 35 more or less that survive. We are in touch with the Office of the Prosecutor, according to her, she was interrogated by the European Parliament a couple of months ago, and by the Droit Libre committee of the Parliament, and was asked about at least a number of Parliament members posed questions on the case. And she was saying that the case is being processed by her office, that they are taking they're making a detailed assessment, and they are looking at it. But my impression is that they are going to address it through the already ongoing pending Libya investigation, the UN Security Council referral on the situation in Libya, and my concerns is that they will leave out the Mediterranean, because politically, again, maybe just to straight the record, legally, this is a very solid case, simply because with all the confidential exhibits that we annex to the case, there is nothing in dispute factually. The EU acknowledges their policies vis-a-vis the Libyan militias. No one questions that there are crimes against humanity committed in Libya. And so there is nothing in dispute in factually speaking. Again, and legally speaking, again, it's a very classical structure of international criminal law since Nuremberg, Yugoslavia, Rwanda, what have you, where you have an apparatus of power that is planning and designing and premeditating the policy. What is the policy? Again, I think we need to clarify. The policy is not to abuse migrants. I mean, the objective of the policy is not to target and exterminate people on the move. The policy the objective of the policy is to stem migration flows at all costs. The means to this end, the costs, are breaching and reaching the criminal threshold of atrocity crimes, not merely human rights violation, not only breaches of laws of the sea or of international refugee law and all the legal frameworks that are typically in place in the context of what we call state responsibility, where states are responsible. Here we are looking at grave breaches, serious breaches, systematic and widespread, that trigger the threshold of criminal individual liability of state agents, of Juncker, of the Commission, officials in the Commission and the Council, and in the member state level of Marco Minniti, the former Minister of Interior of Italy, and so on, and dozens of suspects that we are now, my team is now building a list of suspects, of dozens of suspects, and we attach each one the mode of liability, aiding and abetting, principal perpetrators, and so on. So to back to your answer, I'm not counting on the ICC, because the ICC so legally the case is super solid. There is no way to challenge it. It has never been challenged by scholars and lawyers and we sense its submission. You know, even the groundbreaking argument of killing by omission in the Mediterranean of tens of thousands of, it's no different than any commander responsibility from Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon to, it's equivalent to also killing by starvation, for example, of detainees under custody. You can find, the question is, are you aware? And can you do something about it? And if you are aware and you can do something about it, you are liable. And here it's not even omission, it's a decision of someone, of the drone operator. It's an active decision of the MRCC not to rescue. So even the most groundbreaking argument on killing by omission as a crime against humanity of murder is not that legally complicated. But again, the problem is not legal. The ICC is the realpolitik. It's a highly politicized institution. It has been, the US sanctions the ICC. In Africa, there is no, all the African members, state parties to the Rome Statute, wants to leave the ICC because from 2002 to date, 20 years almost, they had maybe 4 convictions. All of them are Africans. They never went after Western power. And even when she says crimes against humanity are committed against migrants in Libya, she's going after the Libyan actors, after the small fish, the little warlord, the little smuggler. She doesn't go after who is orchestrating this policy, without which these crimes could have never happened, which is her only friends. She said, I can't go to Libya to investigate because it's too dangerous for the ICC personnel, just as EU, by the way, agencies and member state agencies don't step foot in Libya. They work from Tunisia. Why? It's too dangerous. For all these VIP personnel, it's too dangerous. But for dehumanized people that are fleeing an armed conflict, it's perfectly safe to disembark them over there. So the problem is political. The EU is the last friend of the ICC. It's the main funder of the ICC. And just as the EU funds IOM to be present in the disembarkation points and concentration camps in Libya, just as the EU funds the UNHCR to give potatoes to people with tuberculosis in the concentration camps in Libya. The term concentration camp is not me. It's a cable of German ambassador that visited these centers, sent to Angela Merkel before Angela Merkel adopted the Italian-Libyan MOU at the European level, what is known today as the Malta Declaration in 2017. So the funding of the EU for the RESOMA network that Sean is part of, for many, they fund a lot of legitimate agencies and humanitarian NGOs, and they hold conferences on their own violations. And this is what makes it very complex to struggle. We are struggling with that. Why? Because this cognitive dissonances. When Amelia is saying they are sending people on life rafts, this is not life raft. This is our death raft. When Amelia is saying they are sending people with life raft to conducting unlawful refoulement, this is not unlawful refoulement. This is murder. They round up people on the island of Lesvos after being disembarked. They round up people. Let's just activate our collective memory. They round up populations already on land and put them on rafsod and send them. In Algeria, they do it as well. In the desert, they abandon people and they are dead. So this is murder. And when it's a part of a policy pursuant to a state policy or an organizational policy in the context of the EU, this is a crime against humanity of murder. And as long as we are complying with this discourse, I mean, we're accepting the discourse imposed by us, by the EU, by the member state. This is, again, when Sean is saying they are the criminalization of human rights defenders and civil society organizations because they are criminalizing us with smuggling, facilitating and because we are accused of increasing the pull factor. The pull factor is false, but why do we care? I mean, I hope that there will be a pull factor. I wish us all to have a pull factor. I call all the rescue NGOs to be a pull factor and to admit the criminal charges in court and to say, yes, I am assisting, I'm facilitating smuggling because I am complying with international law. Fundamentally, as a human rights defender, because I'm facilitating the legal, not the irregular entry, the legal entry of people who have the right to exercise the right to asylum, the right not to be penalized for their irregular entry or stay. By the way, this is our all provisions in the Refugee Convention for securing the right to life, to liberty, to dignity, instruments in international human rights law, for rescuing them in distress at sea under maritime instruments. So when Carola Rackete is not allowed to disembark in Lampedusa, when she's disembarking nonetheless, and thereafter criminalized, she's exercising international law. We don't need like MSF and SOS Mediterranean to wait for internal negotiations of the EU member states. We will take 20 to Ireland, 20 to the UK, 30 to Germany in order to disembark. Under international law, you have a duty to disembark immediately. And you should do it as a captain, as a master of ship, without delay, especially if you have vulnerable population on board. So you don't need to comply with these strategies of the EU. Wait, we are now resolving our internal Dublin regulations affair, and you will keep torturing populations on vessels for weeks now in order to keep them busy so they won't be able to engage with search and rescue, right? So what I'm saying is that beyond this ICC case, what we are witnessing is not a migration crisis. Again, it's not a human rights crisis, it's a crisis of international law. You shouldn't go to Strasbourg. I mean, we are going to Strasbourg, to the International European Court of Human Rights. We are going to regional and international tribunals, but look what happened last time. We were successful in these kinds of international human rights law courts. The landmark ruling is what? Hirsi. So for those who don't know, Hirsi was the ruling in 2011 saying you cannot, Italy or Europe in general, European state parties to the Convention of Human Rights, European Convention of Human Rights, cannot send people to Libya. To comply with this, it meant that essentially people should disembark in Europe. So instead of complying with this ruling, let's look what happened. It was 2011. The landmark human rights law ruling pushed the EU and member states to adopt even worse policies, to externalize, to do it elsewhere and by others and outside the pale of human rights law. And this is how we got to criminal policies. So this is a crisis, an intrinsic crisis of the liberal ethos of the rights of man that fails to regulate, not only fails to regulate the lives and the rights of individuals, human beings that are not citizens and they are just human beings, but it also, it's not only failing, this is the incentive to aggravate the policies against these people. You see what I mean? So it's an internal failure, it's a colossal failure. And this is why I'm saying just pay attention to the discourse, because, I mean, international law is what we are making out of it, and the way we respond to it, and the way the discourse also, not only the practice, the discourse, that when we are, again, in the context of NGOs, when the EU Commissioner for Migration say, our primary objective in the Mediterranean is to save lives. If so, why are you launching this attack against the rescue NGO? Why do you mind that? Why you are criminalizing them instead of you being criminalized?
Okay, sorry, Omer, I just have to cut you a bit short because there's a couple of questions that have come in, and I'd like Amelia to answer the question about Greece. What I'm going to do, because we are running over slightly, is I want you to limit yours. If you could all just think of one sentence to summarize for people to take away from this meeting, one or two short sentences at the end of the couple of questions for people to take away. So over to Amelia now, just about the change of government in Greece last year and how that's affected the Greek policies.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks, Omer, also for highlighting that really important point about discourse. To make it very clear, I completely agree with you. This is not just a question of people being subjected to a collective expulsion. This is a situation in which people are directly being put into a situation with no assurance of rescue. that is leaving them to die. This is unequivocal, and it's not only happening from the islands that are proximate to Turkey, such as Lesvos. The most recent publicly reported expulsion was from the island of Crete. This is over 600 kilometers away from Turkey. There have been public reports of a rescue where migrants were taken to Crete, landed there, and subsequently subjected to a collective expulsion back to Turkey. We have been in contact with relatives of the survivors who've confirmed that they are now in Marmaris. The kind of perverse commitment to this policy over such an extended space, I think, only underscores the point that you're making here about the mens rea and the approach not only of the individual actors, but of the institutions of the region as a whole. And so, Wendy, to turn more specifically to your question, of course, many of the changes that I described in my presentation have all been since the New Democracy government was elected here in Greece last summer. This has come with a broader package of changes. There have been multiple changes to the asylum law, which have stripped back the already very limited rights of asylum seekers here in Greece. There's been an overt pursuit of mass detention of migrants, which has been backed up with European Commission funding. As I mentioned, there are detention centres being constructed across the Aegean Islands at the moment with 135 million euros in support from the EU. We have seen also the more overt criminalisation of solidarity work, the imposition of onerous administrative requirements on smaller NGOs, which makes it very difficult for people to keep functioning, in addition to intimidation tactics and harassment. But I do want to make sure as well that we remember that Seán's case, for example, was initiated under the Syriza government. Okay, and it was also the EU-Turkey deal that was signed under the Syriza government. It was the containment policy that was introduced as well. So yes, with the Nea Demokratia government, we have seen a shift in rhetoric, particularly harsh policies pursued towards migrants, the expansion of detention, the pushbacks, the suspension of the right to seek asylum, which are all very headline newsy aspects of the migration policy. But it's not as if this was a big shift from something that was based on solidarity and protection in the first place.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll now quickly move on to the questions. The first question is from Matthew Abbey, and I'll deal with this. He's fearful that the methods that have been described in the southern Mediterranean will be deployed by the UK government. And completely, absolutely, the answer is yes. The UK government is looking and will copy these procedures and policies as clearly as they can. And also the UK government has been looking very closely at Australian policies, whereby I think about 10 years ago, migration to the Australian shores, the Northern Territory, by boats is absolutely completely unlawful and a criminal defence, and all migrants are deployed and kept on an island called Manus Island off the north coast of Australia in horrific conditions. Some recently managed to get to New Zealand, but none of them can ever get to the mainland. That's the policy that I think both Europe and the UK would love to have, where migrants arriving on boats were just kept completely out of sight, out of mind, denied access to all humanitarian assistance, and kept on. Manus Island is an island that I think is made of pigeon shit. What more can you say? The next question is really, I think, for Omer, and Simon Murta would like you to say a few words on the complicity of the international non-government organisations who receive EU funding. Could you just say a few words about their role in really supporting the European hostile policies? Or Amelia, or anybody actually.
The question is to me?
Well, actually, maybe I'll switch it to Amelia. Yeah, Amelia would be probably a better place to answer.
I spoke too much, so let's.
Yeah, okay, Amelia. Yeah.
I think in recent weeks, with the construction of the new site here in Lesvos, I've been particularly chilled by the approach of some INGOs in their PR surrounding this new site. So during the construction, the UNHCR released a video praising the exceptional assistance that they had offered to the Greek government here. And I want to underline again that this camp has been in place for a month and there's still no showers. Food's distributed once a day. There's no protection measures in place for, well, there's very limited protection measures in place for women, for children. There's reports that the site could well be contaminated by lead owing to its former use as a shooting range. So when you have groups who are accepting this level of funding and are then using that funding to further those same policies, again, without assurance of whether this is going to be a detention centre, without assurance of whether this is going to be a temporary camp. It's, for me, it moves beyond simple complicity. This isn't like there's a policy going on that they're unaware of. This is something that they're actively participating in.
Okay, thanks.
I feel like we would see that also with the relationship of INGOs who facilitate the deportation, for example, or indeed every aspect of the management of camps and the futures of a lot of the asylum seekers.
And then there's a question for Seán. Oh, sorry, Omar, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just a word, maybe, because I can't help it. I'm a lawyer, so I'm like to talk. But, no, I'm kidding. But just a word on the central Mediterranean context. So, again, all humanitarian intergovernmental organizations supposed to comply with the do no harm. No, this is the basics of humanitarianism, right? And the conflict of interest begins when they are completely funded by those who are designing the policies to which they respond. The situation, the reason why they are there is because their funders are producing a victimization on industrial scale of sending people over there, you see? So they are funded just as the Libyan Coast Guard is funded, right? And then with internal documents and cables that we reviewed when we gathered the evidence, we've seen that the EU officials, from day one, they said, we will put at the front IOM and UNHCR to legitimize our business. We have evidence for that, okay? When they are saying the IOM and UNHCR will be, I'm talking on the Libyan-Italian context. And indeed, if you see public statements and interviews of Channel 4, BBC, whatever, of any EU official on the matter, they say, we don't have boots on the ground. It's ask the UN, the IOM and UNHCR are there to monitor the situation on the ground. Now, the Red Cross today is apologizing for their complicity in the camps, in the German camps in the Second World War, where they knew Theresienstadt and so on, and everyone, you know, so we need these 50 years to wait 50 years till they should be held accountable to the international organizations for working and complicity of aiding and abetting the EU policy. There is no way to say it. I'm sorry to say that, but this is like, sorry.
Okay. Okay, so Seán, the question for you is, how, and it's from Vicky Granderson, how can the principle of charging people with criminal offences for save and rescue complying rather than breaking maritime and UN law be challenged? So I suppose, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, for example, in our case, even though the evidence is fairly scant, there has been no gross wrongdoing as of yet. So we have to wait for it to get to the court. The problem is that the interim, the waiting period, this chill factor is sufficient. So it's not that waiting for the court to dismiss the case, for example, is still a success for the authorities, because in that time it disincentivized search and rescue, for example, the Southern Shoreline, where we were 4 or 5 organizations. And I want to stress that we were the only organization, including from Frontex, that had both medical personnel to the correct amount that would at least be able to see or have some kind of form of triage in an emergency context, plus cultural mediators. all those services no longer exist in the southern shoreline of Lesvos because there is such a fear around these prosecutions. And so even waiting for them to conclude misses the underlying point, and that is the chill factor. Unfortunately, we have to wait until such a time as the case of dismissal goes to trial. We are fairly confident that it will eventually be dismissed, but that seems to be the previous case. It's worth stressing that there has been a case, almost a carbon copy of the allegations on Lesvos, and we are also not the first case on Lesvos. So on the small jurisdiction of Lesvos alone, we've seen a number of cases. That's not to mention the many cases in Italy, and indeed the other cases of alleged breaking of or alleged facilitation across the mountains from Italy to France, for example, or the distribution of food. And that as well is not to mention the kind of non-judicial harassment that includes, as Amelia said, putting in place bureaucratic obstacles that are very hard for smaller NGOs to comply with.
Thank you. So now I'm going, sadly, although there's a lot more that could be said, I'm going to move to the summings up. So if we do it in reverse order, starting with Seán, what would you, it's really, really hard to sum up these massive concerns and topics, but what would you say? Going forward, what would you say to our conference? What can be done? What can we take out of this, if anything?
It's something that is, I suppose, difficult to tackle or to sum up briefly. There are probably a few ways I find myself disheartened a lot of the time, but I think having participated or informing oneself of the context is already in some way arming yourself with the ability to question and discredit some of the policies that were discussed today already, for example, and making that known. So oftentimes, participating more in community or political actions can be useful, but certainly I think this rests in litigating, what as Omer is doing, bringing this to the attention of the court, and thereby pushing the hand of, or forcing the hand of institutions. But from the conversations that I've had with for example, we're working with the EU Facilitation Directive guidelines, trying to get the European Commission's Home Office to draft guidelines. It's very slow going, and they have said that they will, but they aren't particularly useful for us.
Thank you. Amelia?
To echo what Seán said about using this information to question and discredit not only the policies that are being put into place across Europe, but also the public positions that are taken by states in response to the policies themselves. For me, something that will remain consistently important is the litigation, the solidarity and the advocacy work, particularly that amplifies the voices of migrants for whom this is not contested information. This is not a maybe it's happening, maybe it's not. This is a daily lived reality that is putting their lives and the lives of their loved ones at risk. I think being as vocal and supportive of those voices as we can be to ensure that is what's getting into mainstream discourse is one of the strongest forms of offence. Thanks.
And Omer.
Yeah, I believe it resonated with what I said earlier. For me, my insight, again, is after, 15 years of lawyering, is that human rights law, all the instruments that Europe built originally to regulate human rights violations in the context of migration, and also not under the migratory context, has completely collapsed and failed. And this is so what my take, and this is why I took that legal action, is that my understanding is that we have to pursue the individual, to move from state responsibility to individual responsibility, to seek accountability in the criminal context. And if the ICC politically is not strong enough to hold to account those responsible, we will look elsewhere. There is at the national level, not only universal jurisdiction, also national jurisdictions where crimes against humanity and war crimes are internally legislated. And then one day there will be a tribunal for what we are witnessing today. Sometimes we need, like today, no one believed that. Who can imagine what we are living now with the virus, etc. Right? So the 2013 Lampedusa shipwrecks that both myself and Sean reminded, today, the head of the Italian Coast Guard operation officer and the Italian Navy operation officer, two senior individuals are standing trial in Rome for multiple cases of manslaughter, of homicide involontaire, okay, for delaying the rescue that resulted in the death of hundreds of migrants in the Lampedusa shipwreck. Criminally indicted individuals, state agents of the EU member state. So just, I'm trying to recall this myself when I'm saying today the ICC, everyone thinking it's a crazy idea that tomorrow they will stand trial in the EU Commission and Council and all the EU agencies and member states that are involved in the present policies. But maybe it will take 6-7 years, but we will get there.
And I get to have the final word, as I ended up being the first speaker. There's one last question, which is, will the UK state create a holding centre in Newham? Well, I can assure you that there will, I live near Newham, I live in Hackney, there will be massive resistance to that. Newham has got one of the biggest migrant communities in the country, and we will stand firm and we will resist that. And if it's created, we will be there supporting those migrants. I would finish, I think, by echoing a last comment in the chat by Dharma Paul, which is we must expose these policies which lead to death. I still think many people do not understand that. We must magnify migrant voices, and she's asked if we would remember Alan Kurdi. So as long as we all carry on with our individual struggles and with our defence and support for other people, then we will get there and we will make a difference. And we must also remember that this has to be linked to global politics, that in the end it's because, you know, there has been an enormous shift towards capitalism and towards nationalist politics, and we must fight as well in our political world. Thank you all very much for attending. I think some people will be available over the lunch break on Zoom for chat, and some people won't, but I'm going to take a break for a while. But thanks to our fantastic speakers, Omer, Amelia and Sean, who are all so individually engaged and have done so much. Thank you.
I would like to intervene at this point and give solidarity to Wendy and my sincere thanks for what is a very difficult job to chair the panel with such emotions and the gravity of the situation. And we're very grateful for Wendy's help in this conference and for all that she's done over 40 odd years of much campaigning and solidarity for people all over the world. So thank you, Wendy. So we have a bit of a break now, and we certainly encourage you to attend the next section of our conference. We will be having 2 more panels in the afternoon. There's going to be a panel on climate justice, and we're anticipating the way in which there's going to be future waves of migration and the intersection with the climate emergency. We're also going to be having a panel by the Legal Sector Workers United, who with Migrants Organise are leading the fight back, and with Haldane we stand in solidarity with them both. And I would just like to thank Omer, Amelia and Seán for their inspiring talks. So please take a break for now, and we'll have other people joining this call, and we'll let the video and the Zoom call continue, and people will pick it up from there. But please all take a break after that powerful and emotional advocacy and testimony, and well done to all our panelists for their amazing work.